Welcome everybody. So thank you so much for coming along to this evening's event. My name is Jeremy Leach. I'm the chair of London Living Streets. I'm just delighted to welcome you this evening to a joint event between the Urban Design Group and London Living Streets titled Walking and Cycling to and from Railway Stations. We've got a fantastic lineup made up of some in-person contributions, some recorded contribution, and we're really excited to have more than 300 people registered to take part in the event. We're aiming to finish at 7:30 on this lovely evening, and if time permits, we'll have some questions to the panel later in the event. Please do use the chat if you want to have a dialogue about things that crop up during the evening. But if you also put questions in the chat, we'll try and pick up a few at the end for discussion with the panel. Please remember that the event is going to be recorded, so I hope that's okay with you. And please do keep yourselves on mute if you can. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first contribution, which is from a recorded contribution from Chris Martin, the treasurer at Urban Design Group and also from Urban Movement.
And hello everyone. Very glad you're able to join us for this hugely important discussion on the connection between active travel and public transport. My name is Christopher Martin. I'm co-founder and director at Urban Movement, an urban design practice founded to investigate these very moments where transport meets everyday life. This is a joint event this evening from the Urban Design Group and London Living Streets, and I have the pleasure of being treasurer of the Urban Design Group, as well as being a trustee of Living Streets. And together these organisations represent a monumental force for good in making us think about new ways to better shape cities and people-friendly places. So I very much look forward to tonight's conversation and continued collaboration into the future. The first thing to say is that from my perspective, transport must be a servant to quality of life for all, serving the people cities are for. There's a point in all cities where transport proliferates to threaten human quality of life, negatively impacting air quality, safety, attractiveness, prosperity, city life, relaxation, and the environment in which we live and grow up in. And the problems, the challenges, these urban crises which we are living with today in cities are very much linked to these environments that we've chosen to deliver. Better linking active travel and public transport is crucial to extending the reach of public transport and extending the benefits of active travel to more and more people. If we need more people to use active travel and public transport, which we do, then we need to make moving about in this way the most seamless and the most effortless. If there's an easier choice, a more enjoyable choice for how we move about, then we are simply going to choose that instead. So I'm very interested to hear the good ideas for better connecting active travel and public transport, because so often this vital connection falls between the cracks. Importantly, we need to open up access to public transport for those walking and cycling, regardless of ability and background. So how are we making it easy for disabled and blind and partially sighted people to access public transport? How can our public transport systems welcome all the different types of cycles that we need to accommodate to open up these connections for those that need to use them? How can we make the connections between active travel and public transport compelling for children? What do they need to make things safe and indeed fun? How seamless is the connection for those with pushchairs, strollers or shoppers? And if this isn't an exquisite experience, what do we need to change tomorrow to open up public transport for those walking and wheeling? In short, transport investment is truly unique. We can positively influence a huge number of policy and lifestyle ambitions through investing wisely in transport, and seamlessly integrating active travel and public transport opens up the benefits of both, the health benefits, the social benefits, and the climate benefits, not to mention the economic benefits, to more and more people, creating better places for people to live, work and play in urban centres, as well as in suburban and more rural residential neighbourhoods. This is the job of designing for movement, really, so hugely excited to get into tonight's discussion. And the last thing I want to say is just a big thank you to the Urban Design Group and London Living Streets for bringing this together. Huge amount of work, and I'm really looking forward to it. And thanks to all our expert speakers, of course. And most of all, thank you to everyone tuning in and taking part. Really looking forward to it. So back to you. Thank you.
Lovely. Well, that's fantastic from Chris Martin there. So I'd like to move on now to the keynote addresses from the polymath Christian Wolmar, journalist, author, railway historian and advocate. And Christian's going to sort of set some context for this now. And I think I think we'll all get a greater sense of the territory after we've heard from him.
Okay, I'm sorry I can't be here in live, but I had a prior engagement. But obviously this is a subject dear to my heart, having just written Cathedrals of Steam, which is the story of London's dozen main terminus railway stations, a story that incidentally hadn't been told for about 40 years. And in that 40 years, they have been mostly improved immeasurably. But in looking at that history, what is interesting is that there was no vernacular of railway stations, which also meant there was no kind of great thought as to how to get into them. So the first London railway station, London Bridge, was a rather higgledy-piggledy affair that, because the trains ran on a series of viaducts from London Bridge out to Greenwich, the London Greenwich was the first London railway company. You had to kind of climb up stairs or inclines to initially get to the station, and then get to the platforms. And I'm afraid that as you tour around London's terminus railway stations, you will see that not that much thought has been given to how people manage to access them, particularly from the outside. Later on, they were connected by underground stations, and I'll come on to that in a minute. But London's mainline railway stations, with one exception, Marylebone, were built between 1836 and 1874, all dozen of them, plus Broad Street, which has been subsequently demolished, and one or two minor ones. But essentially, they were built as huge mega projects in that period. But if you start to look at how people could get to them, it's quite difficult. Ironically, many of them had taxi ranks inside the stations. There were inclines that taxis would drive down, or they would go in through portals in the front and pick people up. But as for getting into them directly from the street, there were often staircases. There were, in the case of one or two subsequently demolished stations like Bishopsgate, even double staircases that people had to climb up with their luggage, possibly having walked already through often areas that were not particularly kind of pleasant. Think of, the area of King's Cross, even in our lifetimes, kind of 20, 30 years ago, was a pretty unpleasant place. But similarly, Waterloo was in a very rundown area. Even Bishopsgate, which long preceded Liverpool Street for about 30 or 40 years, that was also in a really rundown area, and so on. So you had to kind of wade through large numbers of costermongers, market traders, and whatever. There's old pictures of King's Cross, for example, that show the frontage completely cluttered by something that was called the African Village, which was really a bunch of kind of small stalls, small outbuildings, and you had to kind of push your way through that to get into the station. And that was a pattern that was repeated widely across the capital. And then we got something of an improvement in connecting with the underground. The Circle Line was in fact built really as a linkage between the mainline stations in London. And therefore there was better access. But even then, sometimes the station, the underground station, was outside the perimeter of the mainline station itself, and you had to cross a road. You had to, again, struggle past lots of people to get into the station. And it was only later on that, when there were improvements to stations, that the entrance from the undergrounds were actually incorporated within the existing mainline station, and making access and egress much easier. But again, it was a long kind of period of improvement, and it isn't really until the recent redesigns of major stations, such as the wonderful work done most recently at London Bridge, but also obviously St Pancras, although I have some criticism of St Pancras because actually the design is to encourage you to go through a kind of mass of shops rather than use the much less cluttered upstairs, but that doesn't have any shops in it, so it doesn't kind of gain much rental. But nevertheless, the improvements, as I say, at London Bridge, St Pancras, King's Cross, probably Liverpool Street, which was the earliest of the major improvements, the access has been greatly improved there, and the concourse has been improved. Ditto Waterloo, where the concourse was incredibly cluttered. That too now has a lot of open space. There was a slight tendency in the 70s and 80s to put too many kiosks and too many shops in the middle of those concourses, and that has again rather improved. With some of those have been removed, and that's again made it easier. But all the way through, I think the problem has been that there was no vernacular of stations. There was no kind of standard way in and out. In the early days, there were separate entrances and exits that were kept apart. But even so, they were often tucked away in little tunnels and corners and the like. And it's really taken almost 2 centuries to improve that situation and to realize that, you know, access from the street without being in a vehicle is actually a very important way into the stations, and much more work needs to be done. So, you know, I welcome this conference. I welcome the ideas that you're discussing here, and I hope that they translate through to a better way of people getting into stations.
So that's fantastic historical perspective from Christian there, and many thanks to him for recording that. So I'd now like to move on to Dr. David Harrison, who's going to talk about the London Footways, mapping better routes to station. David's probably familiar to you all. He's a vice chair of London Living Street, and along with Emma Griffin, a co-founder of London Footways. So over to you, David.
Hello, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this excellent event. Just a little bit about the London Living Street Footways idea, which I developed with Emma Griffin in particular, but with great help from Jeremy and other people at London Living Streets. What we're essentially about is creating a network of routes. And this then we put together to form a map. And you can see some of that in the background. It's particularly about getting between key destinations in London in an enjoyable way. It's about enjoyable everyday walking. And the links often now in central London are really very good, but the severance between central London and the railway stations and the difficulty of getting into the railway stations can be a serious problem, which I'll explore. So the idea is simply that if people enjoy walking, our basic idea is if people can enjoy walking, they will do it. It is, in the words of Chris Martin, who spoke earlier, the idea of sustainable hedonism, or should it be hedonistic sustainability? If people are going to walk, and it's a lovely thing, and the places within central London are quite small, and they can be walked relatively easily often, especially from mainline stations to, say, Covent Garden or whatever, but it has to be nice. It has to be more fun than the alternatives. So here we are looking at some of the things we've tried to do. Link key destinations, King's Cross, the British Museum, and campaign also for improvements. We have some lovely streets, we have some lovely links, but they need to be better. Here are the routes. And what I hope you'll like about this paper map, which was generously funded by TfL. And if you go to our website, there is also a digital map, which you can expand, which is perhaps more easy to interrogate. But the point about this map was to show London potentially from a pedestrian's point of view. And we think this is the first map there's been for pedestrian everyday walking, where the roads which you can see, the main roads which you can see in white, are looked at in a slightly different perspective. They fade into the background, the red routes come to the foreground, and you can see London as a pedestrian, with a pedestrian's priority. The distances, as we show here, are really quite short. So that, for example, Euston to the British Museum by foot is 19 minutes. In a taxi, it's only 17 minutes. And by public transport, it is 16 minutes. So once you take into account having to go down to the tube or queue up to the taxi or sit in the traffic jam, walking can be just as quick and nicer. I must say that when we first published this map, there was a MERS question from a taxi driver complaining about the times, which was quite interesting. But improvements are needed. Not all the routes are perfect, but there are severe problems at stations. Let's look at Bloomsbury. Obviously, as Christian said, around King's Cross was always was not very pleasant in the 19th century, but Bloomsbury itself was absolutely charming. And you can see here it's got even nicer. So you can see Gordon Square, top left, Judd Street now with the traffic removed, Brunswick Square, right-hand corner, where Camden have made some superb improvements. Bottom left, Lamb's Conduit Street, a delight to walk to. In the centre at the bottom, Woburn Walk, late 18th century London's the most delightful shopping street, which is a great way of coming southeast from Euston. And in the bottom right, Red Lion Street with its new filter. Enables you really to walk all the way from St Pancras to Lincoln's Inn Field on the most beautiful walking conditions. But the problem is, as you arrive at these stations, there is very little idea that you can effortlessly walk southwards. As you arrive, they obviously are driven to go by public transport. As you can see on the right-hand side, here is St Pancras Station, 1867, beautifully restored. The problem is that that the great ramp that leads up to St Pancras, which people used to entrance it by, is now simply a route for cars and taxis of the wealthy to get to the new station. So what you have with the beautifully restored St Pancras is in fact a beautiful hotel with a terribly sad pedestrian exit. This is people on Eurostar. So if you look at the top left, you can see a little underground sign. This is where you come out if you want to be brave enough to struggle southwards to all those beautiful routes in Bloomsbury. And if you look at the bottom left, that is what you see if you're a pedestrian. So you come out, you've just arrived from the continent on the Eurostar, and these two square holes, these rabbit warrens, say, welcome to London. Euston has similar problems. I hear what Christian said about them being badly designed. And obviously the entrance to the great Hardwick Doric Arch, built 1833 to 37, was taking traffic of all kinds. But at least you knew where you were going. You knew how to get to the station and how to get away from it and southwards into Euston Square. There was a vocabulary of architecture that said, this is the entrance, this is the exit, you go through here, you know where you're going. And look what they did in the 60s and 70s. They turned Euston Station into a place which was sort of hidden, where you could scarcely know how to get in and how to get out. At the top, you see Drummond Street was running east-west. Drummond Street disappeared here. And then to make matters worse, you have this office block put in the 70s in front of it. As you exit Euston Station now, you have no sense of the joy of Bloomsbury beyond and the fact that you might walk effortlessly there. In fact, you just walk into a station. Fortunately, we are hearing from Grimshaw's later, and I'm so looking forward to how they're going to improve this situation. It should be great. Sorry, we've King's Cross is It's in many respects ideal. There have been huge improvements here. It's a fantastic concourse. You can see where you're going. You leave along this beautiful concourse. It is fantastic. The railway people have done everything they can. But then look at the mess you come out of. As you come out of that concourse and head south, looking at Argyle Square, you see what you see on the far left. Guardrails you can't cross, no invitation whatsoever to walk southwards. Clearly the needs of motor traffic have been prioritised over that of pedestrians. To cross the south, you have to go over St Pancras Road, heading westwards, and you'll see that you actually have to cross quite a busy road before you can then even turn south. So you've got the junction road between St Pancras and King's Cross, busy, traffic turning quickly into it. At the very least, you'd have thought that all the motor traffic would have to enter from the north and turn around and go back northwards, so you could have a more seamless pedestrian journey. Let's look at Waterloo. Fabulous arch, celebratory arch here. Looks great. But look at the top right. Look at the appalling clutter that greets any pedestrian wanting to head south. Who would think, oh yes, I think I'll walk over Waterloo Bridge? You're greeted by this, you're put off. Obviously, you're going to catch the tube for a very short and unnecessary journey. And then if you want to walk over Waterloo Station, this is what you're greeted with as you approach it. You can't even do that if you're disabled. The difficulty of it all, the lack of thought gone into it. Again, it's not so much the station's fault, it's the highway authorities. And of course, once you're onto Waterloo Bridge, if you can fight your way through all that clutter, that disappointing entrance to the bridge, you have the most wonderful views in the world, looking towards St Paul's and the city. But getting there, let's create an environment where we want to walk there, where we're led to and encouraged to. Paddington, the journey from Mayfair to Paddington should be one of the great joys. You go through Hyde Park, you come out of Hyde Park, but then really you're met with something so disappointing. This is Sussex Place, which you come across first on the right. It's not too bad, but I mean, it's not something that you really want to walk. And then you're in London Street, and it is all just a mess. I mean, you struggle through, but you don't want to walk, do you? So just to say, it can be better. In the centre and left, this is Nîmes. This is what the approach to railway stations should be like. This long boulevard that takes you from the centre of Nîmes to the railway station. This is where you want to walk. This is the gold standard of what we should have. But I also ought to say that that London stations are by no means the worst, and I'm sure that other people will have their contributions. But I would have thought the approach to Oxford Station must be possibly the worst in the country. So thank you very much, and that's me. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, David. That was absolutely fantastic and a really, really brilliant critique of the core issues involved in tonight's conversation. I think it was really nice you ended with Nîmes, because I think that picked up on a comment that Mark Philpott had made earlier about how even at small stations, the Dutch have an ability to make the walking, cycling entrance to the stations really attractive. So yeah, work needed in England, and take some cues from Europe. I'd like to move on to some contributions now from the Dundee University postgraduate students. Now, these are all recorded, but we're really delighted to say that lots of the Harry Langdale, Conor McKinley, Yash Parker, Lucy Stiles, Martin Walker and Gemma Watson are, I think they're almost all here this evening in the meeting. And they're just going to have a state of the art of review in relation to walking, cycling, looking at the psychology of fear, natural surveillance, public lighting, electric bikes, overcoming hills, unbroken walking cycling network, and street space reallocation. So this is recorded, but put your thoughts in the chat. The chat's proving really helpful as to what people think and stuff. So thank you.
Good evening. We're delighted to be able to share this presentation with you tonight. We are from the University of Dundee and are all MSc students undertaking spatial planning with sustainable urban design. And as you'll hear, we all found our way to this course from a wide variety of backgrounds. By reflecting on our studies into the 20-minute neighbourhood in the city of Perth, Scotland, we will share some of our thoughts and observations on walking and cycling to railway stations. So just a little bit about my background. I've spent 10 years in private practice. I currently work in a local authority supporting the delivery of major projects, and I'm a part-time MSc student. The 20-minute neighbourhood has been making headlines. It's become a buzzword. It has different brands in different parts of the world. The 15-minute city in Paris, the 20-minute neighbourhood in Portland and Melbourne, and the superblocks in Barcelona. 20-minute neighbourhoods are places where residents can meet their daily needs by walking, wheeling, or public transport close to their home. Daily needs includes things like shopping and services, accessing green space, education, healthcare and employment opportunities. The potential benefits include improved health and well-being, local wealth building, community cohesion, a reduction in carbon emissions and in mitigating the impact of climate change. And why now? Well, there's the backdrop of the climate emergency. All eyes will actually be on Glasgow at COP26 later this year. We're at the start of a very difficult conversation around public space. Who's it for? Who does it represent and celebrate? The ongoing pandemic and the inequalities that are experienced in society. And to unpack that COVID piece just a little, COVID has offered the opportunity for testing new ideas and offers some temporary behaviour change. We've seen things like pop-up cycle lanes. Everyone has spent more time at home and many have had the chance to reconnect with their neighbourhood, and some people are really benefiting from that, getting their commuting time back, being able to drop off kids at school, go for a run, essentially being offered a new work-life balance, a new way of living. And for others it's not so good, and the COVID spotlight really has shown us how much inequality exists in society. So many don't have access to adequate housing, don't have access to green space and suffer the health inequalities. And finally, COVID also might create a reluctance for us to go back to using public transport in this new world we're living in. A 15-minute city or a 20-minute neighbourhood, the times are somewhat arbitrary because we all walk and move at different speeds. A 12-year-old biking alone, a parent with a double buggy, someone who's visually impaired or has mobility issues, they're going to have a smaller 15-minute city or 20-minute neighbourhood. So what's important is that these distances are safe, they're continuous, they're comfortable and positive and manageable experiences to cover the distance. Destination is also key. We need positive and attractive destinations, but we also need to consider how far people will walk. Studies show people are prepared to walk less distance for a bus stop or a corner shop, but further to work. This must be considered when planning links and connections to public transport hubs. And maybe this is what a 20-minute neighbourhood could look like. This is taken after the diagram drawn by Dr. Yang, looking at it in a Scottish context in the city of Perth, where we've looked at that Paths for All data showing us how far people are prepared to walk for something, and also the numbers of people and the sort of services that they might expect. So the bus stop, the play area, the green amenity and the local shop are very close to home, but further on a regional transport link could be 20 minutes away. And it's our observation that Perth should be and could be a 20-minute neighbourhood. From the outer edges, we can cycle comfortably within 20 minutes to the city centre, and the city centre itself is very walkable. And the final part about making a 20-minute neighbourhood is about density and intensity. We need the numbers of people, but we also need the mix of housing. We need different people, different generations, and we need the volume of people to support the services, including transport, that people need. And we need to look cleverly at these things. We need to think about hubs and overlapping neighbourhoods and shared neighbourhood facilities to make these things work so that they're sustainable and remain distant within distances that we want to walk and destinations that we want to go to. And this is Perth, how it's grown from 1860 in the first image right up to 2020, where the population has only actually increased by 17,000. It's our observation that this 20-minute neighbourhood could provide the framework to increase active travel to and from railway stations. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Yash, I'm from an architectural background and currently I'm working on my research on the understanding of experiences of streets. Today I'll be talking on the transport networks and their significance in response to walking and cycling to and from railway stations. Often, the transport systems exist as broken networks of cycling and walking routes. To improve the share of people using rail and bus transit, these networks should be developed as continuous systems, seamlessly connecting the users with their destinations through safe travel options. This will connect neighborhoods and city cores to places of work, study, and leisure. Discontinuity in transport is caused by contextual situations, for example, the gradient and the distribution of services across the city, making it difficult for an equal, comfortable access by users of all age, abilities, and gender. To function effectively, the transport network should be designed such that they are accessible to all, frequent and convenient as per the needs, and connected to all the places of interest. Various measures can be undertaken to respond to such issues. At an urban scale, the routes of walking and cycling should be made continuous. As example, Copenhagen currently has 375 kilometers of dedicated cycling lanes. By 2018, the use of cars reduced from 35% to 32%. Another tactical measure is to include mobility hubs at strategic locations. By integrating various transport modes, these hubs provide transit options to the user to suit their needs. They also act as a shared resource that is supported by nearby services and promote green travel. In situations where slopes add a challenge to connecting places, public elevators can provide a safe and inclusive alternative. In Bilbao, this is used as an advantage to cover the 27-meter height gradient, thereby connecting the nearby neighborhoods with the metro station. With an initial investment, this project delivers cost saving in longer run as compared to development of private and public transit between these spaces. At a strategic level, the travel can be further enhanced by integrating modes through policy. In Copenhagen, users can carry cycles into the metro, which has resulted in a 49% of total work and educational travel done through bicycles. Currently, there are several infrastructural opportunities such as park and ride facilities across Scotland. However, they are focused mainly on connecting public transport with motorized movement. Through the development of continuous networks of cycling and walking routes, these can be transformed to incorporate such active travel options. As seen in Netherlands, the train station promotes bicycle use through spaces for 22,000 bicycle storage. Because of an integrated approach, almost 50% of the train users commute to the stations through bicycles. In conclusion, the cities need to develop travel networks that are continuous and well connected, with an inclusive design approach to make them available for everyone. Thus, generating travel routes that are accessible, efficient, and safe for all. And this can be done through a holistic development between networks, their supporting infrastructure, and an inclusive experience-based design implemented across different scales.
Hello, I'm Gemma and my background's in sociology and social and public policy. I'm interested in inclusive planning and design, access to cycling and placemaking, and today I'm going to talk about cycling as a lived experience. In order to improve cycling infrastructure around railway stations, we need to think of how we can better enable and promote cycling in general. It's a way of life, it's a method of movement which can bring with it health and social benefits, and then there's the freedom which comes with picking up your bike and going wherever you please. People tend to resist change and they'll not start cycling because a couple of cycle lanes have been added where they live. We need to consider how we can improve the social, spatial and sensory experience of cycling alongside physical changes to encourage people to give it a go. In terms of the social aspects of cycling, we should consider how cyclists interact with each other and other road users. Cycle hubs are great because they give people a place to park up their bike, grab a coffee and rest, or have a chat with other cyclists. Shower and changing facilities also help people to feel more comfortable cycling longer distances. Integrating cycling with public transport can make cycling for leisure more popular. For example, the bicycle trains in Stuttgart, Germany are hugely popular. They only cover a small distance of about 2 kilometres, but they allow cyclists an alternative to cycling uphill. Sensory factors include how comfortable the bike is, how safe you feel, and what is in your field of vision. Continuous protected cycle lanes make people feel more secure, and being able to see clearly for a long distance allows them to cycle a little bit faster if they're in a rush. Paving surfaces should not change height because that is less comfortable, especially when your bike has very little suspension. Examples of fun and vibrant cycle paths can be seen in the north of Poland, where they are glow in the dark. They use the synthetic material phosphor, which is charged by sunlight and makes a path glow at night. The spatial experience is about how people navigate and locate cycle lanes. Temporary measures are a good way of engaging people and helping to make cycle routes more visible and consistent. This could be reallocating road space or installing pop-up parklets. Clear signposts help to avoid people taking a wrong turn and ending up on a busy road, which isn't safe. One of the best ways of coming up with designs is to hold competitions. Some of the most innovative ideas have come from local authorities competing against each other to become the most cycling-friendly area. We Are Cycling UK say that the 3 most important methods for increasing cyclist numbers are providing opportunities for people to learn, fix and ride their bicycles. The theory is that people need the capability, opportunity and motivation to change. Not everyone knows how to ride a bike correctly. Teaching people where to position themselves on the road, how to be courteous to others on mixed-use roads and general bike maintenance is essential. Therefore, interactive bike repair stations, skills centres and shops should be interspersed along all major routes. I'm going to talk about a couple of case studies now. Copenhagen has historically had issues with creating enough parking for the increasing demand at its railway stations. So a design company called Copenhagen Eyes produced a design for over 7,000 parking spots at Copenhagen Central Station, making use of the space above the railway tracks. It includes ramps down to the platforms and a bike shop for servicing, and it's one of many being considered by the City of Copenhagen, highlighting their commitment to connecting cycling with rail travel. Superkillen is a park which was designed specifically to bring refugees and locals together in one of the most ethnically diverse areas of Copenhagen. The park is described as a highly walkable experience and it includes a well-maintained bike path, bike parking and cafe space. Since it was built, pedestrian and cycling activity has increased due to its stimulating environment which encourages people to be more active. So I've talked about some successful design ideas, but there are also many design fails. For example, cycle lanes have been placed in the middle of busy carriageways, which is a safety issue. Bike lockers have been installed in some cities which are too small, and cycle racks are sometimes located too close to buildings or roads, meaning that the front wheel either doesn't fit or is protruding into the road. Cycleways which intersect with tram lines and trees can be a serious safety issue, especially when it's raining or icy. In the 50s, a town called Stevenage was seen as a trailblazer in high-quality, joined-up cycling infrastructure. It provided 12-foot wide cycleways and 7-foot wide pavements. However, the majority of residents still chose to drive. The Masterplan projected that 40% of residents would cycle and just 16% would drive. However, today, only 3% of residents cycle, and many are still unaware that they have a 23-mile cycle network. The issue is that the town has an easy-to-follow, high-capacity traffic system. This suggests that investing in cycling infrastructure is no good if driving is still perceived as easier. So how do we help more people to access cycling? The future of cycling design may well be using virtual reality to test out solutions. One company already providing this is Urban Future. They create models which simulate the cycling experience, allowing a designer to remotely cycle down a particular street or intersection as a child or as an older person to identify issues which may arise. To summarise, we should remember that cultural change takes time because people are often fearful of trying new things. However, if we give them confidence in the system by making cycling a fun and safe experience, then we can change the norm. If you take one thing away today, it should be that you can't design effective solutions without having cycled yourself. If you haven't got a bike, I would urge you to consider getting one. If you don't know how to ride, ask someone you know to teach you. The best way to make improvements is to immerse yourself in the social, sensory and spatial experience of active travel. You never know, you might even enjoy it. I will now pass on to Harry, who's going to discuss how to overcome accessibility issues in active travel.
Hello, I'm Harry. I've got a geography and environmental science background and I'm currently researching the impacts of COVID on green space use. Looking at how electric bikes can enable accessibility, it's crucial to highlight some of the issues of active travel. Firstly, is it available to all ages? Is it available to all abilities? And are there costs involved? Well, e-bikes do have assisted power for longer distances and difficult topography. Traffic engineering for cycling now is more disjointed, so e-bikes could help there. And the assisted power is also seen as a benefit when looked at. Cycling was chosen for a mode of transport to work due to its quickness. This wasn't due to environmental reasons. When they are correctly located, they are more easily accessible. There's also funding available to lower the costs involved, so it is a utilisable option. In Nice, the south of France, their e-bike scheme really helped to enable accessibility. It's formed of 175 stations, 1,700 bikes, and you're always within 300 metres of one. It utilises the waterfront and the promenade and helps to access them. But it's the simplicity of design, the branding and its marketing that help to really create an identity of the bikes. And this has helped to create an identity of the city overall itself. Looking at how bicycle hubs can also help to enable accessibility. Firstly, some issues of active travel again are water availability, bicycle repair, places to rest when you're out and about, and dry bicycle storage locations. Bicycle hubs, they're service providers that can vary and range from a simple place to store a bike or a place to get a coffee, fill up a water bottle. Really, they've just got different functions based upon what their need is. But when located at a strategic location, they can really help to provide assistance when trying to travel around a city. An example of bicycle hubs could be looked at as in Craigie in Perth. This was a case study. It's an area that's really challenged by topography as shown in the visual. Blue star highlights where the train station is. So with that challenging topography in mind, the 4 red squares show the proposed locations where bike hubs could go in this neighbourhood. They were chosen for their green spaces, they were outdoor recreation areas and their proximity to services. Essentially, they were selected at these 4 locations to allow people to travel into the city, but also for people coming from the city to travel out and then access the near countryside for this city centre. So what are some take-home points for enabling accessibility? Well, correct selection of location is paramount, as well as making sure that the function meets the needs and wants of that local population. The first impression from use does really matter, so it's vital to make sure they're implemented effectively first time round. It's also crucial that the infrastructure around it can support the e-bike scheme and the bike hubs, but also that it's not just an infrastructure to be used, it can also help to create an identity for a city.
Hello everyone, my name is Martin Walker and today I'm going to be talking about comfortable streets. My background is in geography and I've just recently joined a local authority as a development management planner. I have previous experience of research into active travel projects as a geographer. My current interest is blue and green infrastructure, with a particular focus on the aspect of amenity within sustainable urban drainage systems. Given that the topic of the event is walking and cycling to stations, I have chosen here 2 examples of train stations in Scotland which demonstrate the challenges for creating comfortable streets. Dundee's train station is newly refurbished, yet you have to cross several lanes of traffic just to get to the entrance, meaning that access by walking or cycling is not particularly safe or attractive. The image on the right is King's Place in Perth, which leads directly into Perth train station. The street doesn't appear to be welcoming or provide nearly enough space that would actually be required if walking and cycling to the station was truly a viable way of making the journey there. If access by walking and cycling to stations is to be encouraged, how can this realistically take place in spaces like these? Rotterdam Central Station in the Netherlands is a great example of what a comfortable street looks like. The main aspects of creating this sense of comfort is space, safety, attractiveness, activity, and connectivity, all of which are themes being discussed in this presentation. This demonstrates that collaborative thinking and design is required to deliver these spaces. You can see that Rotterdam has achieved this comfort by creating lots of space for pedestrians, limiting vehicles, and using green spaces to increase the attractiveness of the area and provide pleasure for those using the spaces. The Sheffield Great Green project is the UK's largest retrofit sustainable drainage system and demonstrates how existing monotonous grey roads can be transformed into attractive multifunctional green space. The project converted what was previously an inner-city dual carriageway into an area which provides safe passage and recreational areas for pedestrians, as well as managing surface water flooding and enhancing biodiversity. The evidence shows that having access to these green spaces is positive for health and well-being across all ages, especially in light of the pandemic, which has increased the demand for access to these spaces. The multiple benefits that green and blue infrastructure can offer has led to increased focus on how they are designed and perceived to maximise the positive physical, mental and practical outcomes that the public can benefit from. The Glasgow M8 underpass shows how a simple change of colour and retrospective design can make an area feel much more comfortable. The strong, vibrant colours and unique phoenix flowers, as they are called, illuminate at night, providing a pleasant walking and cycling experience at all times of day for an area which would otherwise go unnoticed and likely avoided. Applying the principles of comfortable streets in our own work, These images are from our urban design project in different neighbourhoods of Perth. These demonstrate how artwork and lighting can enhance safety and connectivity between previously disconnected urban areas and also contribute to a sense of place by acknowledging the cultural heritage of the area, which is integrated into the design. Building upon the idea of lighting and safety, I will now pass over to Connor, who will explore these topics in more detail.
Hello, my name is Connor McKinley. I'm a forensic psychobiology graduate with interests in safety and lighting in the urban environment, along with improving suburbia and public art. When it comes to fear within the built environment, it is important to first understand the subconscious cues humans use to determine the safety of it. One well-established theory of this is called prospect refuge theory and was devised by J. Appleton in 1975. It suggests that most species' basic needs are based on their ability to see and their ability to hide. The extent to which the environment offers these features affects how comfortable a person feels within it. For example, it's why you may naturally feel more comfortable sitting in booths rather than at an open table in the middle of the restaurant. Within this theory, researchers have identified three important cues that we use to determine the safety of an environment: prospect, concealment, and entrapment. Prospect is the extent to which a person's field of view is unobstructed, while concealment refers to the extent to which potential threats are offered a place to hide, such as bushes, walls, and shadows. And entrapment refers to the presence of physical barriers that prevent escape in case of emergency. These three cues are important factors in safety perceptions and has received much support, with other studies showing that environments with high prospect and low levels of concealment and entrapment are associated with lower levels of fear of crime. Now, with perceptions of safety, there tends to be gender differences. Gender is a consistent predictor of fear of crime, with many studies noting that women typically have lower perceptions of safety in public space and public transport than men. Research shows that trains in particular are very fear-inducing to women at night due to the confined nature of the carriages, which illustrates the effects of entrapment, and the fewer commuters and staff. Unstaffed stations and underpasses en route can also exacerbate this and force women to take less convenient routes to get to train stations. The behavioural consequences of this is that people, particularly women, will avoid areas perceived as unsafe. They will abstain from going out when dark and travelling alone as well. This disproportionately limits women's freedom to enjoy public space and use public transport. So how does this inform walking and cycling to and from train stations? Well, to encourage active travel to these transport hubs, it's important that we help to improve perceptions of safety amongst everyone in society and reduce the gender fear gap. And a good way to make places feel safer is by attracting more people to them to facilitate natural surveillance and to animate the area. Initially, however, it can be hard to provide sufficient density across urban centres to aid with this. Therefore, by concentrating activity in what we can call safe corridors, we can provide adequate activity of people along them through the implementation of mixed-use space along the way. Now, following McCormack's hierarchy of transactions, having street markets, bars and restaurants along these safe corridors would increase interaction with the public space and draw in the density required to provide sufficient natural surveillance and to improve perceptions of safety. Now, as well as peopling these corridors, effective lighting, well-maintained ground floor plinths and facades, clean streets and dedicated cycle space that is separate from traffic all influence the effectiveness of the corridors in improving feelings of safety, especially amongst women whose perception of safety can be heavily influenced by them. While increasing things like CCTV, the presence of law enforcement and the implementation of shutters can help reduce the actuality of crime, too high a concentration can actually create the impression of a hostile environment, and therefore should be done in moderation along these corridors so that perceptions of safety are not damaged by them. If safe corridors can be created to train stations, then walking and cycling to them during both the day and night can be encouraged and facilitated, not just with women, but for everyone.
So that was just fantastic contributions from the Dundee University students there. I'm just so grateful to them. And I think there was some really, as regards what we're talking about here this evening, I think some really valuable sort of summarising ideas, the idea of space, safety, attractiveness, activity, and connectivity is really useful. So I'd like to move on now to Richard Crutchley from Tibbalds Planning and Urban Design, and he's going to talk about Sutton Coldfield as another example of these issues, a master plan for connection and a case study looking at that. Richard, over to you.
Okay, hopefully you can see my screen and presentation okay. Good, got the thumbs up. Yes, this is a case study for Sutton Coldfield. It's a piece of work that we've recently been involved with. The work was commissioned by the Royal Sutton Coldfield Town Council with Birmingham City Council. Tibbalds worked with Urban Movement, SQW and the Retail Group on this particular piece of work. It was approved by the Town Council in August 2020, and it's been adopted by Birmingham City Council as an SPD only in the last couple of weeks. It's a town centre master plan, so the focus is wider than just the railway station. It's focused particularly on rejuvenating the town centre, on breaking the dominance of the ring road, which circles the main commercial centre, improving the centre's offer overall and capitalising on its current opportunities. Now that includes HS2 investment in a transport interchange that would take the bus station out of the main commercial core and the main circulation area of the shopping centre into a part of the ring road between the commercial centre and the railway station. So I was just saying that the focus of the master plan is on rejuvenating the town centre, breaking the dominance of the ring road, improving the centre's offer and capitalising on those current opportunities, which includes this transport interchange between the main town centre and the railway station. So the station in Sutton Coldfield is a key part of the overall jigsaw, but it's not the focus of the town centre master plan in itself. We were actually retained by the Town Council to respond to the Stations Places document that was common across the West Midlands. I'll come to that a bit later on and tell you a little bit more about that as well. Just for context, in terms of, has the slide moved on, by the way? Yeah, okay. For those who don't know Sutton Coldfield or where it is, it's in the West Midlands. It's northeast of Birmingham city centre. It's the grey blob in the middle of the map that you see. It's quite open. It's quite green. It's has a good perception. People think of it as an affluent place. It's very close to Sutton Park, which is one of the country's biggest old hunting grounds. It has a good number of smaller local centres around it. Places like Boldmere and Wild Green, which have really performed well during the lockdown, better than the town centre itself because of sort of more personal, more independent approach that these centres have. There is planned expansion to Royal Sutton Coldfield on the eastern side, so that was part of the thinking of the master plan. The town itself is very close to the M6 toll, and the infrastructure around the town tends to be highway dominated, and there's a real reliance on the car for movement. A lot of the routes are radially into Birmingham city centre, and in fact the main road from the toll motorway through Sutton Coldfield to Birmingham is the main road between the motorway and the city centre. Sutton Park is a massive asset for the town. It's the gateway to Sutton Park. And there's so much that goes on recreationally there. It's a great open space, but it's effectively a barrier to movement to the west. But as I say, this strategic network is very good. And the station itself sits on the Birmingham to Lichfield Railway, which is it's mainly a commuter passenger railway that links the area north of Birmingham through Birmingham and I think to Bromsgrove. These two maps show the line of our actual study. So they're probably not particularly clear. You can see Sutton Park on the left-hand side there, just coming into the map on the left-hand side. But the red line is around the main town centre area. And on the right-hand side there, we grouped it into character areas. So the darker purple is the Royal Town Core, the main commercial centre, the main shopping area of the town. To the north of that, the paler pink is the historic core, where the town originally established itself along the high street. And the blue blob, where the British Rail sign there is the station quarter, which is a real sort of linchpin between the two. From the station, you could get directly into the historic core, you could get directly into the Royal Town Core. And our master plan was very much focused on the latter, access into the shopping centre where most of the shops and the services are. On the left-hand side there are some arrows which relate to the pictures I'm about to show you that give you some of the views around the town. So top left there is the view from the historic core into the town centre, downhill, and you're looking there at the the shopping centre, which is mainly a 1960s, 1970s mall type shopping centre, dominated by big blocks and internal private spaces. Top right, traffic issues in the high street. I say it's dominated by traffic, and the main road between the motorway and Birmingham city centre goes through this. This is actually school kicking out time. So you can see there children on the pavements, the red light at the crossing where kids are having to cross the road, very busy with traffic, delivery vehicles parked on the pavement very narrow, real problems in the high street there, and a historic environment, a conservation area. The main street bottom left, when it's quieter, is very attractive. It's got a nice feel about it. It's quite comforting to be in that street. And D is the view from the railway station. As you come out of the railway station, you are greeted by, you know, the ring road, this 3 lanes of traffic whizzing around the commercial core of the town, and some quite complicated crossing areas as well there. So it gives you a little bit of a feel for the context that we were dealing with here. And really the objective of the master plan was to turn Sutton Coldfield from that middle tier centre that was losing out to the city, Birmingham city centre, which was really thriving, and losing out to the independent centres that are smaller but more personable, losing out to both ends. We want to try and elevate the status of Royal Sutton Coldfield, so it's complementing the city, providing something for the city. The people who live there can travel to the city, perhaps by train, it's the most obvious form of public transport, to the city, but also live in Sutton Coldfield and enjoy it as a town centre, and also complement the independent centres as well by providing higher order goods that the independent centres don't offer. The station itself, to give you a feel for that, this is it's actually the side of the station, but it's the main entrance from the station to the main shopping area. This is what people have to go through to get from the station to the town centre if they want to do shopping or they want to go to work. So what you'll notice here is it's very dark, it's a narrow entrance, there are stairs from the platform. It's only 3 or 4 stairs to the exit, but there are stairs there nonetheless. It's going to stop some people using this entrance. There are no lifts, and on the exterior you can see it's got no real presence there. It's very dark. There are no station services there. There's no kiosk. There's nobody helping. There's no signage. It's a very poor exit and entrance to the main station and the entrance to the town centre. This is what you do when you come out of the station. You come out through that narrow entrance, and this is what you see. It's not terribly welcoming. The street isn't enclosed. There are no active uses. You've got a car park on the right-hand side. There's a lack of signage, and it's close to very complex road junctions. That picture at the bottom is, as you move down that street, that is what you are faced with. You've got rails, you've got complicated roads and junctions, you've got fast-flowing traffic, you've got a single pedestrian crossing. It's very intimidating. And looking back from that junction to the station, you can see how little presence the station actually has in the street scene. You can see the pub with the station. The station is called the pub is called the station. So the sign is actually saying the pub name, not this is the station. But there's no signage there. It's very cluttered. But the station isn't visible. There are no signs visible. And yet you can see people on this route. It's clearly a well-used route. It's just not very attractive. And it's literally a sort of 60-second walk from the station into the main shopping centre. Very, very easy. This is the front of the station. The front of the station faces a historic core, and it's not too bad. I mean, it's okay as an entrance. It's quite welcoming, but it's not really leading people into the town centre. It's not the main entrance of the station. And the bottom picture there shows you really how the station is elevated. The station in the left-hand quadrant of that picture, the station's at the back on top of that embankment. So there are height differences between the main town centre and the station itself. People are having to go uphill. And people were seeing that during the consultation engagement we did. People were seeing that as a barrier. People perceived that as a longer distance because the terrain was putting people off. There's actually a footpath from the street to the left-hand side of that house in the bottom picture that takes you up to the station. It's a very steep footpath. It's not very well lit. It's quite dark. It's treed. And in winter, it's going to be slippy. It's not very inviting at all in terms of getting to the station from the town centre. So in terms of the master plan, as I say, it's a town centre master plan. So it wasn't focused necessarily on the station, but the station was a key part of it. But what the master plan was trying to do overall was focus on that commercial core. to break down the ring road. What we wanted to create there was a series of urban streets that would encourage walking and cycling along them, numb the effect of the traffic, attract people into the town centre by walking and cycling, so reducing the amount of traffic on the street. Reduce the speed of traffic using the ring road as well through public realm improvements, downgrading the highways, which was quite controversial for a town full of car drivers, but actually was welcomed as well by a lot of the people who live there and wanted to see that. What we also wanted to see was greater penetration of those private spaces, particularly through some of the shopping malls, which were enclosed a lot of the time. And we wanted to make sure that we were activating the current ring road by having shops and other activities actually facing those streets, so it would encourage that movement and that activity. Clearly, we wanted to have better public realm, better frontages, clearer routes through things like better signage and wayfinding. So the master plan not only had long-term physical projects, which introduced new uses over time and changed the focus of some of the shopping malls perhaps to other uses like leisure and employment and even residential within the town centre, but also have short-term interventions such as wayfinding, public realm, marketing, events and those sorts of things. Within the master plan, we do focus on the station quarter. It's part of the master plan. And what we were looking for within that area was to bring more active uses to the street, to help the enclosure, to make it more welcoming, to make the routes between the station and the commercial core more attractive and easier for people to walk between, easier to see naturally where the routes actually were, make it readable because, as I've said, it was actually very, very close to between town centre and the railway station. I mentioned the Stations at Places work. This was done by the West Midlands Stations Alliance, and they did a number of reports for a lot of stations across the West Midlands, and we were fortunate that they'd done a piece for Sutton Coldfield as we were doing the master plan more widely. So we were able to draw on some of the things that Stations as Places were trying to achieve at Sutton Coldfield. And whilst their document was very, very detailed and had lots and lots of ideas in it, it was quite mixed. There was no particularly clear delivery within there. And with the master plan work, we had to sort of pull out the relevant elements of it. But what they did have in there was something that's touched on in one of the earlier student presentations, was this idea of the last mile, improving the last mile to the station. So making the station a hub, making it easy to get to, ensuring there are clear connections from the surrounding area to the station and also from the station to destinations in the town centre. It picked up on reducing the impact of the ring road. So Brassington Avenue was the western side of the ring road that we focused on as well. They wanted to ensure the connectivity with some of the new extension areas in the town. They wanted to use some of the spaces on the station for small startups and creative enterprises and that sort of thing, and enhance the entrances and the connections around the station as well, to make sure that people, coming to the station felt welcomed and that Sutton was welcoming them into their place. As I said, we were retained by the Town Council to look at how a lot of the projects related to one another. Some of them were short-term interventions, some of them were long-term interventions and physical, and there were lots of issues around land ownership and phasing and delivery and where the money would come from. And that's what the interdependency work actually looked at. And we actually incorporated the Station as Places ideas, some of the Station as Places ideas into the interdependency and really pulled that out as something that the Town Council, along with the City Council, could work on straight away and improving that very, very poor access between the town centre at the railway station, and improving some of the environments and the public realm around the station, so it can start to perform that role as the link between the historic core and the town centre, and the link between the commercial core and the railway station, which was so important to the overall master plan for Sutton Coldfield, and really a catalyst to get people thinking about living and working in the town centre, using a railway station as a place to start journeys north and south to Lichfield and to Birmingham, but also to allow people to see Sutton Coldfield as a place to live and a changing town centre through the changes you can make immediately to the quality of the railway station in the town centre. That's me.
Wow, Richard, that was absolutely brilliant. That was the most fantastic dissection, I think, of a lot of the urban planning issues over the last 50 years, both in terms of the access to the station itself and the context for that, with how our towns and cities have changed over the past 50 years or so. And I think it's really interesting to pick up on a comment of Simon Carnes in the chat of saying how all these things seem to have been given a focus by the pandemic. And I do think there's an urgency being added by this, and there's an awareness of the importance, perhaps tied in with air quality and climate change, of the urgency of making these changes. Richard, thank you so much for that. So I'd like to move on now to Declan McCafferty from Grimshaw's, who's going to talk now about station design and active streets.
Okay, so so my name's Declan McCafferty. I'm a partner at Grimshaw Architects. It's nice to hear London Bridge getting shouts out as a good example. London Bridge was one of the projects I worked on. I've also been working on the design of some of the Grand Paris Express metro station projects in Paris. And more recently, I've been working on HS2 Euston Station. So David said I was going to show some examples of how I'm going to improve Euston Station. I may have to disappoint you, David. So I will show some of the work that we've been doing. Some of the Euston, the work that we're doing on Euston, we will be sharing and doing public consultation on later in the year. But unfortunately, due to confidentiality, I can't share any of the current work that we're doing. What I thought I'd do is show, I'm an architect, I would share some of the drawings we've done in terms of analysis about why do stations not support active streets? Because a few people have mentioned, Christian mentioned the historical issues that stations have had. And the impact that they have on their surrounding communities, and then maybe looking at a citywide scale, and maybe looking a little bit more at a neighbourhood scale. And I can show some of the work that was done on a previous scheme on Euston on cycling, and then again just some hand sketches I've done around some of the station work, looking at trying to solve issues at a more human scale. So some of the ideas that we're working on, and hopefully most of these ideas will work their way through to HS2 Euston Station when we're finished the concept design. So looking first at city scale issues. Now I think a lot of these slides will repeat some of the analysis that everyone has said so far. In reality, stations should support active modes of transport. They take you normally into town and city centres, and from that place, walking and cycling should be easy, but they don't. And there's a number of, Christian's mentioned the historical issues, but there's also some physical issues that are preventing stations becoming real hubs of walking and cycling. The first one is many terminus stations, so many of the stations in London, are end loaded. It's changing slightly, but it means that you come off the train, you get out at one place, all the pedestrian movement is focused at one place, which becomes a problem because of the public space available. That causes congestion issues, which decreases the quality of the public realm. And all the surface transport modes, including cycling, but also buses and taxis and London Underground connections, all happen in one place, which means that the public realm gets overly congested. Meanwhile, the flanks of stations, the walls that face into the surrounding communities, often end up dead and unactivated. And you can see that on Eversholt Street in Euston, York Way in King's Cross, even St Pancras Way. So that's a problem that all stations have, or that many stations have, and the severance that causes has an impact on the quality of the public realm and the quality of the streetscape, mainly on the sides of stations, less so in the fronts of stations. And that you can see that that's not just a public realm issue, that actually impacts the investment in those areas and the life chances of people who grew up in those areas. You just need to look at the difference between, say, Somerstown and Regent's Park West Estate compared to Bloomsbury, all of which are equidistant from Euston, but it's the communities to the east and the west that suffer more from that severance. changes are happening, and I had a set of slides that was going to show how we might resolve some of this, but we're a bit short of time, and I think I can describe it through some of the other work that we're doing. But stations are changing; they're becoming multi-centric. Platforms tend to be getting longer. Therefore, you get multiple concourses, you get multiple front doors. Station spaces are beginning to be used as extensions of the public realm and open up and have a more outward-facing aspect to the surrounding streets, all of which encourages street activity and walking. And you can see that in London Bridge, you can see that in St Pancras. Particularly east-west across St Pancras, and at times, outside of peak hours, St Pancras, the spaces within St Pancras are actually used more by non-passengers than passengers. So this is some early work, and as I say, this isn't the current scheme we're doing on Euston, although a lot of these lessons are informing what we're currently doing on Euston. So HS2 Euston is, let me see if I can draw on here, is actually this portion to the west. The existing Network Rail station is to the east. So we don't have the freedom to redevelop the whole footprint. But the thing that we focused on from the beginning of the design was looking to push the platforms below ground, so that the platforms and the train movements don't become a severance at ground level as they are in the existing Network Rail station. That means you can create concourses, and you can distribute those concourses north-south, and you can start to align them with key routes. So aligning concourses with, say, the high street of Drummond Street, a really active, really successful local high street, means that number one, you encourage, you create views out onto those streets, you support local economies, and you encourage people to move east-west along local streets. So you don't close the station off to the surrounding streets. What that means is you have to break apart the station itself and align it and focus those key station areas to match the kind of street grain and street pattern of the surrounding streets, which is something I think you will see in the new HS2 Euston station. In terms of the station itself, a lot of the station spaces are focused in the centre of the station, and around the edges we're creating opportunities for development. Lend-Lease are doing a master plan for the whole campus, including the Network Rail station, which means that those links you could see up and over the Network Rail roof will be enabled by a future Lend-Lease scheme, so that some of those east-west routes can start to continue at multiple levels across the station campus. This just shows some of the work, very illustratively, some of the work we've been doing on cycling. Now, again, the station is a severance particularly to east-west cycling, and that's mainly driven by the Network Rail station being at grade. We're introducing a new north-south route, so to pick up the slightly informal routes from Park Village East onto Regent's Park, to pick up the slightly frightening but gradually improving route along Hampstead Road, and take that down and into Coburg Street and around the edge of the station to link down to Bloomsbury, so linking back into the really successful cycle infrastructure in Bloomsbury. To support the east-west routes, that north-south route can then link through south of Euston Road into those routes in northern Bloomsbury to link across east-west. So there's some really big potential improvements in that. Lend-Lease are also looking in their master plan to create some upper level cycling routes across the roof. We're creating distributed cycle hubs along that route, so about 2,000 space cycle hubs in total, 2,200, including cycle hire. And one thing worth mentioning is, and there are good examples in Holland, as everyone has mentioned, but even in Holland, they sometimes struggle to get those cycle hubs into active streetscapes. And this is where there's sometimes a conflict between the activity or the lack of activity that cycle hubs can provide with the kind of active streets that we're trying to create around the station. There's a conflict. It's not unsolvable, and most cycle hubs now have cycle facilities, use multi-stories, have cycle shops embedded in the frontage of the hubs themselves. But it is once you start getting above 2,000 cycle spaces, it becomes quite a large. They become quite large structures in themselves, because obviously we have no space underground to put them because of the trains are underneath the street. These are just some examples that we've had. Some of these are working through different station schemes we've done on competition entries. Some of them are looking at earlier versions we've looked at on Euston. One of the things for me, one of the frustrating things about pavement space around stations, first of all, is you normally end up with a huge line of bollards. The streets around them are quite tight, and you can see that around London Bridge. And you need hostile vehicle mitigation to stop vehicles mounting and driving into the station as part of a terrorist attack. What we were trying to do here was look at the edge, look if there was a way to celebrate and provide views into the station, but provide planted edges along the edge and seating, embed seating into the station, so that the street can actually be part of an extension of the dwell space within the stations themselves, and provide enough activity that you can kind of curate that edge without it just being bollards. So using retail kiosk seating and planting as part of that amenity around the edge of the station. The critical thing for us, and it's fairly obvious, but it's know your audience and kind of know the station community and get to know what the different types of passengers that are in the station. But also, stations have now become such public spaces. It's actually getting to know what are the needs of the surrounding communities and the non-traveling users of the building. This was a scheme that we did as a competition entry, looking at the temporary spaces, so temporary use of spaces around a station under construction. That's also a passionate interest of mine, because some of these projects can take 7 to 9 years to build. Therefore, the temporary public space that you can create, the activity you can create, and the life that you can create can help embed the projects even while they're being constructed in the surrounding communities. And some of them are designed to become permanent community spaces. This is looking at the Western Gardens near Drummond Street in Euston. So looking to create a permanent community space alongside the station. Alongside the station itself. One of the other things, and I think the Dundee students were mentioning, opportunities for pocket parks. If you've got a 300-meter square piece of space, is there an opportunity to create pocket parks? And certainly along Coburg Street in Euston, we're looking at opportunities like this, as well as in other stations. This was just looking at a small pocket park that would incorporate Sheffield stands, within the planting, incorporate seating, and also give an opportunity for some play space or art. And one of the things we were thinking about here is it's in quite a built-up area. The views that you get from the kind of station forecourts, which are quite often limited by buildings, providing some views through to that pocket park gives a hint, even to passengers, that there's something more interesting happening on the streets around the edge of the station, and attract their use and create a pocket park which is both amenity to local communities, but also to station users as well, as part of the wider dwell space. And final slide, this is a bugbear of mine, is the public seating around stations tends to be absolutely abysmal, and but it should be relatively simple. There tends to be two types of people who use that seating around stations. There's more than two types, but there are local communities that use it, who tend to be in small social groups. There tend to be travellers who sometimes travel in small social groups, and quite often travellers that travel together in twos or ones. So there's always a demand for places to sit and take in the street view on your own without feeling you're entering a social group. But you also need, concave spaces to sit so that you can face towards each other in a social group and have a sandwich, a coffee, and a normal conversation. And I think what we're looking at in many of our station projects is looking to create that kind of variety of seating around stations, but also create space to sit in full sun, which would be pleasant on most days, but on days like today, it's also quite pleasant to sit in shade. So thinking about the detail, the human scale about how people can use and will be encouraged to behave socially, but also be allowed to read a paper, look at their phone on their own, is part of the essential thinking about how we activate those streets and pull people out of the stations as part of their active journey for walking and cycling. And that's it from me.
Declan, that is amazing. Thank you very much. That was fascinating to understand the sort of design development that's gone into those into the new Euston station. So our final presentation is moving on to Toby Meadows from Network Rail, and he's going to talk about initiatives and progress at King's Cross. Toby, over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm based in the country, so I'm going to turn my video off because I think you'll probably lose my voiceover if not. So hello everybody. So I'm the Station Customer Experience Manager for King's Cross. Relatively new role within the industry, believe it or not, for our major stations. My focus is on King's Cross Station, as I say, but some of the principles that I'll talk about today I think do apply to most of our stations within the London area. I feel quite fortunate working at a fantastic station like King's Cross. And as one of the presenters said earlier on, being a destination, one of the things that we're trying to achieve is really trying to make it a people-friendly transport hub. So I'm really coming from the operational perspective, what are we trying to do at a station to make it more of a welcoming and friendly environment for all of the users, whether that's our passengers, business users, people traversing on a day-to-day basis, just wanting to come and buy a coffee or even visit platform 9 3/4, which we're quite famous for. So on average, we have around 170,000 people travelling through the station every day. Obviously, that's dropped off quite significantly because of the current COVID situation. So we're currently have around 80,000 people travelling through the station every day. And most of those obviously going on to public transport, whether that's using London Underground, using bus connections, travelling across the St Pancras station to get international travel, or onward walking to various different locations. So can you click on to the next slide, please? So some of the things that we've done locally within the station to make information more accessible is we've introduced these mobile information points. So they're dotted around the station. We have 8 in total. They're proving very, very popular with our customers on the station. Within them, there's lots of different information. So it can provide train information, it can provide night bus network information, it can provide tube information. It also provides local tourist information and, most importantly, enough walking route information. So you can see where you are positioned in the station. You can touch the screen, it's interactive, you can expand the walking route, look at various different sites along the walking route and plan your route, take a photo using your phone if you're fortunate enough to have one, and obviously follow the directions or just use a sat nav. But this is proving really popular. We introduced these back in November of last year, and they seem to be really popular. We can update them on a regular basis, so we can add different locations as we identify additional popular locations from passengers and feedback from the local community. So move on to the next slide, please. So just building on the customer experience side of things, we had the really awful metal seating up until recently. People didn't enjoy sitting on the seating. People were always asking to charge their phones, and we didn't have any charging points within the station. So again, building on that, customer experience, making it a destination. We've introduced this type of seating within the station. All of the tables have charging points fitted, so it's also cordless charging as well. So just place your phone on top of the table, it will charge it automatically. There's also 3-pin standard UK sockets and USB charging points as well. And we've increased our seating capacity within the station to just over 500 seats. Previously, it was just around 230. So it's made quite a big impact. It's proven really, really popular. And obviously, people getting off trains, moving around. You know, if you're fed up with walking, you might want to sit down for a short while. It's always important to have somewhere nice to sit. Next slide, please. So building on top of that, we've made all of our toilet facilities free, because beforehand, I don't know if you know, we used to charge for the toilet facilities, but we believe that should be a free service. On top of that, we've enhanced all of the facilities at the station. Everything now is touch-free, and we've improved accessibility for the visually impaired and people that have mobility issues. Proving again very, very popular. At the top left-hand part of the slide, throughout the station, we've also included QR codes and viewpoint feedback devices. At the moment, we've received around 90,000 individual feedbacks from passengers and customers that use the station, and we do use that information to improve the facilities and also to just check how we're performing from a customer's perspective. And since the toilets have been refurbed, prior to the refurb was achieving a 67% satisfaction rating. That has now gone up to a regular 93% satisfaction rating. So that's really, really good news. Obviously, the important thing there is obviously keeping the facilities free, keeping them clean, keeping them safe. And that's really what our customers want. Next slide, please. So one of the issues that we get feedback from people that use the station is visibility of staff, approachability of staff, helpfulness of staff. So we've introduced what we call our journey makers and travel ambassadors. They're visible on the station the majority of the day, usually up until about 10:30 in the evening. And they can provide lots of different information, even on walking routes, but they provide cross-business information. So regardless of the service that you're travelling on, they'll know about that train service. They'll know about the local environment. They'll be able to advise you other forms of transport to get. So these are landing really, really well, and we're receiving real positive feedback on that. It was one of our lowest scoring areas in terms of customer experience, and obviously it's really important that people do feel that they can be welcomed and they have accessibility to staff on the site. And hopefully you'll see these being introduced at other stations, whether that's travel ambassadors throughout the network at some point. That's the major stations anyway. Next slide, please. So in terms of cycle storage, we recognise that this is something that we need to get right. The current cycle parking at the station really isn't adequate. We've got 225 existing, what I would call the toaster rack type parking bays. We are going to replace all of the cycle parking bays with the 2-tier rack type system. The image I've put in there is just as an example. It's going to look better than that. It's going to be a high-end system that we'll be using, and supporting that, we're actually installing maintenance points, as well as the ability to inflate your cycle tyres and so on. So that's going to be a real plus for the station. The double parking facilities will exist on platforms 0 to 1 and platforms 8. So we're hoping that's going to prove popular with people that obviously want to move on using cycling as their onward transport. Next slide, please. So again, just really not wanting to go over too much. This is our customer information point, one of our key touch points within the station. It's really, really important that we provide accurate and helpful information. I believe the onward walking guides are going to be provided from the customer information point. So yeah, just saying that we're trying to obviously encourage people to use different modes of transport, and encouraging all of our staff to be approachable and friendly, so people want to use public transport and not use their cars, and hopefully we're doing a fairly good job about that. Next slide, please. So in terms of the concourse, you know, I was saying at King's Cross, we're very, very fortunate really. We've got a fantastic station now following its redesign and opening in 2009. We are trying to make it more of a destination and entertainment venue as well as a public transport hub. For people that do have mobility issues, it is one of the few stations where you can actually access every single part of the station as a wheelchair user without the need of using a lift and an escalator, unless obviously you need to get to the mezzanine level, but you can actually access every single platform at King's Cross without using a lift and an escalator, and that is a big bonus for people with mobility issues. Also, you know, from my perspective, between King's Cross and St Pancras, if you use the northern entrance and exit points, that is proven very popular with passengers and customers alike from both stations. There's lots of nice seating areas. We actually work with Busk London to put buskers out, so it makes it more of a welcoming type environment. And it's fantastic walking routes up to the new coal drop shars where the Regent's Canal is, lots of nice bars and restaurants. And I think that whole area, we've got it, you know, fairly well, you know, in terms of accessibility and encouraging people to walk rather than use any other form of transport. Next slide, please. And that's it from me, because I know we're short on time and I think we've overrun. So thank you very much, everybody.
Toby, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. I mean, what an incredible transformation has occurred actually at the station, but also what an amazing transformation that you've been able to have occurred during such a difficult pandemic when services have been so under strain. So really, you know, an amazing achievement.